Hey there, sailors and history buffs. Welcome to Boom on the Water, where we dive into the most fascinating naval disasters and triumphs throughout history. I'm your captain on this voyage through time, and I'm thrilled you've decided to come aboard. This is one of my first films on the channel, so I'm still finding my sea legs here. If you enjoy what you're watching, I'd be incredibly grateful for your support. Drop an anchor by hitting that subscribe button, fire a broadside with a like, and if you find this content valuable, share it with fellow history enthusiasts. Your support means everything as we set sail on this journey together. Now, let's get into today's story. Picture this. It's a moonless night off the coast of Calais, July 1588. You're a Spanish sailor on the greatest fleet ever assembled. You've been sent by your king to bring England to its knees. You're part of the Invincible Armada, 130 ships strong, carrying 30,000 men and enough firepower to make the English wish they'd stayed Catholic. Then you see it. 8 burning ships cutting through the darkness, sailing straight for your fleet. No crew, no control, just floating infernos driven by wind and tide. Someone shouts, "Fire ships," and panic erupts. Anchors are cut, not raised. Ships collide in the darkness. Your perfect crescent formation shatters, and that's when the English attack. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and explain how Spain managed to turn the greatest naval force of its time into one of history's most spectacular maritime disasters. Welcome to How Not to Invade England, the Spanish Armada Disaster. I'm your host, and today we're diving into a perfect storm of terrible planning, religious zealotry, and weather so bad it convinced people God must have picked a side. It all begins with 2 monarchs who couldn't stand each other. In one corner, we have Philip II of Spain, defender of Catholicism, ruler of an empire where the sun never set, and a man with the charisma of stale bread. In the other corner, Queen Elizabeth I of England, Protestant icon, virgin queen, and a woman who turned political survival into an art form. These 2 weren't always enemies. In fact, Philip had once proposed marriage to Elizabeth. She declined. Nothing gets a 16th century superpower more upset than a romantic rejection. But that wasn't the real reason for the invasion. The real problems were religion, piracy, and Dutch rebels. See, England had broken with the Catholic Church decades earlier, and Philip, as Catholicism's most powerful defender, took this personally. Then there was Sir Francis Drake and other English sea dogs who kept raiding Spanish treasure ships returning from the Americas. Philip called Drake the Dragon, while the Spanish ambassador called him something I can't repeat in polite company. The final straw was Elizabeth supporting Dutch Protestant rebels fighting against Spanish rule in the Netherlands. Philip decided enough was enough. England needed to be taught a lesson, forcibly returned to Catholicism, and, while he was at it, he'd make himself King of England too. What could possibly go wrong? The plan seemed simple on paper. Send the Spanish Armada up the English Channel to rendezvous with the Duke of Parma's army in the Netherlands. Together they would cross to England and march on London. Elizabeth would surrender, Protestantism would be crushed, and Philip could add another jewel to his crown. But here's where we encounter our first spectacular blunder. Philip appointed the Duke of Medina Sidonia to command the Armada. Now, Medina Sidonia was a capable administrator and a loyal noble. He was also completely unqualified to lead a naval invasion. How unqualified? When offered the command, he wrote to Philip, "I have no experience of the sea. I get seasick. I have no money." That's like appointing someone who's afraid of heights to pilot your air force. To his credit, Medina Sidonia knew he was the wrong man for the job. He begged Philip to reconsider. Philip refused. The Duke even tried the "I'm too sick to lead" excuse, listing his various ailments including fever, heart palpitations, and kidney stones. Philip's response was basically, take some medicine and get on the boat. While Spain was busy putting a landlubber in charge of their navy, England was preparing. Elizabeth gave a rousing speech at Tilbury where she famously declared, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too." Meanwhile, her naval commander, Lord Howard of Effingham, was working with Francis Drake to prepare a nasty surprise for the Spanish. The English ships were smaller but faster and more maneuverable than the Spanish galleons. They also had better cannons with longer range. The Spanish strategy relied on getting close to English ships, boarding them, and overwhelming them with soldiers. The English strategy was to keep their distance and pound the Spanish with cannon fire. It was like a boxer with a longer reach facing an opponent who can only throw punches up close. In May 1588, the Armada finally set sail from Lisbon. It comprised around 130 ships carrying 8,000 sailors and 18,000 soldiers. They called it La Felicissima Armada, or the Most Fortunate Fleet. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Almost immediately, the Armada ran into problems. Storms forced them to take shelter at Coruña, where they discovered their food and water barrels were leaking. The food that wasn't spoiled was often inedible anyway. Biscuits were so hard they broke teeth. The salted meat was rancid. The water was foul. Medina Sidonia wrote to Philip that, "The best thing we can do with the Armada is to disband it." Philip told him to keep going. By July, the Armada entered the English Channel in its famous crescent formation. English beacons blazed across the country as warning signals. When Lord Howard first saw the Spanish fleet, he reportedly said, "In the name of God, what a formation!" And he wasn't wrong. The Spanish crescent stretched for miles, an intimidating sight to be sure. But then came the first battle off Plymouth, and things didn't go quite as planned for the Spanish. The English kept their distance, firing at the Spanish while staying just out of range of Spanish guns. It was like watching a heavyweight boxer get peppered with jabs while swinging wildly at air. Still, the Armada maintained its discipline and continued up the channel. The English harassed them but couldn't break their formation. After several skirmishes, the Spanish anchored off Calais, just 30 miles from their rendezvous with Parma's army. Here's where things went from bad to catastrophic. While anchored at Calais, the Spanish received troubling news. Parma's army wasn't ready to embark. They were stuck inland dealing with Dutch blockades. The Spanish had no safe port to shelter in, limited supplies, and now discovered their invasion force wasn't even ready. It's like arriving at the airport for a family vacation only to find out your spouse and kids are still packing. Then came the night of July 28th, when the English launched those 8 fire ships I mentioned earlier. The idea was simple but effective. Take some old ships, load them with pitch, tar, gunpowder, and anything else that burns well, set them alight, and aim them at the anchored Spanish fleet. The psychological impact was devastating. Spanish sailors had heard horror stories about hellburners, specialized fire ships the Dutch had used at Antwerp that were packed with explosives and caused massive destruction. The sight of burning ships bearing down on them in the darkness triggered pure panic. Medina Sidonia ordered his captains to cut their anchor cables rather than waste time raising them, planning to return for the anchors after the danger passed. But in the chaos and darkness, the disciplined formation that had protected the Armada disintegrated. Ships collided with each other, some ran aground. The tight crescent scattered like pool balls after a break. Dawn revealed a Spanish fleet in disarray, and the English pounced. The Battle of Graaling that followed was the decisive engagement of the campaign. For 8 hours, English ships pummeled the scattered Spanish vessels. Spanish ships ran low on ammunition, having brought cannonballs that didn't even fit their guns. Who does that? It's like bringing AA batteries for a device that needs AAA. By the end of the battle, the Spanish had lost 5 ships and suffered severe damage to many others. More importantly, they had been pushed north past Dunkirk, with strong southwesterly winds preventing any return to the rendezvous point. The invasion plan was effectively dead. Medina Sidonia called a council of war. Their options were limited. They couldn't go back down the channel past the English fleet. They had no anchors to hold position. They couldn't rendezvous with Parma. The decision was made to return to Spain by sailing around Scotland and Ireland, a journey none of them were familiar with and for which they had no reliable charts. And then, as if things weren't bad enough already, the weather decided to make its grand entrance into our story. Violent storms struck as the Armada rounded Scotland. The Spanish called it the Protestant wind, believing God had sided with the heretics. Ships were driven onto rocks, others sank in the open sea. Thousands of Spaniards drowned or were killed when they washed ashore on Irish beaches. One Spanish captain, stranded in Ireland, lamented, "The countryside is very rough and cold. The people are savages. They live in huts made of straw. There's no order. They don't know if they belong to the English or themselves. Not exactly a 5-star Yelp review of 16th century Ireland. The survivors faced a nightmarish journey. Many Spanish sailors died of thirst while surrounded by water they couldn't drink. Others starved to death with empty supply holds. Some ships became floating coffins, with crews too weak from scurvy and typhus to even manage the sails. When the remnants of the Armada finally limped back to Spain in October, the extent of the disaster became clear. Only about 60 ships had made it home. Approximately 15,000 men had died, most from disease and drowning rather than combat. Spain had lost not just ships and men, but its aura of naval invincibility. According to legend, Philip II received the news with typical stoicism, saying, "I sent my ships to fight against men, not against the winds and waves of God." Though I suspect his private reaction included more colorful language. Meanwhile, in England, Elizabeth ordered a medal struck with the inscription, "God blew, and they were scattered." Nothing like rubbing salt in the wound. The English celebrated their victory as divine intervention, conveniently downplaying the role of their superior naval tactics and fireships. So what can we learn from this spectacular failure? Well, for starters, maybe don't put someone who gets seasick in charge of your navy. Also, make sure your invasion force is actually, coordinated. And perhaps check the weather forecast before sailing around Scotland. The Armada's defeat didn't end the war between England and Spain, which dragged on for another 16 years. It didn't even prevent Spain from building more armadas, though none as large as the 588 force. But it did mark a turning point in European power politics. For Spain, the disaster marked the beginning of a long, slow decline. For England, it was a moment of national unity and the beginning of its rise as a naval power. Within a century, England would eclipse Spain on the world stage. The story of the Spanish Armada reminds us that even the mightiest military force can be undone by poor planning, bad leadership, and terrible luck. It shows how overconfidence can lead to catastrophe, and how the side that adapts to changing circumstances often prevails over the side with the rigid plan. As for Medina Sidonia, the reluctant admiral returned to Spain expecting disgrace. Instead, Philip recognized he had done his best in an impossible situation and allowed him to retire to his estates. He lived another 8 years managing his lands and probably thanking God every day that he never had to set foot on a ship again. So the next time you're having a bad day, remember the Spanish Armada. No matter how badly you've screwed up, at least you haven't lost a 130-ship fleet, failed to invade England, and altered the course of European history. Unless you have, in which case I'd love to hear that story. This has been How Not to Invade England, the Spanish Armada Disaster. Thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end. Your time and attention mean the world to this fledgling channel. If you enjoyed this nautical tale of hubris and disaster, I've got great news. Next time on Boom on the Water, we're sailing back about 2,000 years to bring you Battle of Salamis. When the Greeks outsmarted everyone again, the Persians show up with a mega fleet. The Greeks answer with one sea lane and a sassy strategy. It's brains versus boats, and spoiler alert, the boats get wrecked. So until our next historical voyage together, remember to subscribe, drop a like if you enjoyed this, and always check the weather before launching an invasion. See you on the high seas of history.